Hello, this is Geoff Wildman of redsky.uk.net with one of my series of talks on the Book of Revelation. During my first 6 months working as forum pastor on the Righteous Responders Forum based in the US, I came to realise that possibly the most hotly debated subject amongst evangelical Christians stateside is the timing of the rapture. Does it occur pre-tribulation or mid-tribulation or indeed post-tribulation? Well, in this talk, I'd like us to think about the timing of the rapture. Now, there's a couple of places in the book of Revelation where the rapture could be said to take place. But from what I can see, the only place where the rapture takes place for pre-tribulationists stateside is in Revelation chapter 4. John, on the island of Patmos, has had his vision of the risen Jesus. Jesus has just dictated his 7 short messages to the 7 churches in the province of Asia. And now John hears a voice from heaven saying, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And here is the point at which we are seriously expected to believe the rapture takes place. John's caught up to the 3rd heaven to receive visions of the future, but we're expected to interpret that as the rapture. But does the text actually say that? Of course not. If there are any past events in Revelation, they are John on Patmos and John in heaven. I think this interpretation does great violence to the text. Doesn't Paul tell the church in Corinth that he was caught up to the 3rd heaven on one occasion, into the very throne room of God? And doesn't he go on to say that he saw and heard truly amazing things? But was every believer on the planet taken up to the 3rd heaven with Paul? Of course not. Now, I know all the arguments that are given for placing the rapture at this point, Revelation chapter 4. The word church never occurs again throughout the book of Revelation. But you know, arguments from silence are always considered weak. Truth is, the saints are referred to many times beyond this point in the book of Revelation. Also, of course, there are those who say the messages to the 7 churches somehow equate to the entire church age. Well, although these 7 churches may typify the church, and indeed the churches over the last 2 millennia, the truth is they were actual historical churches that existed in John's own lifetime. And to somehow interpret them as equating to the entire church age, and to somehow interpret John's own individual visit to heaven as equating to the rapture of the entire church, as I've said, does rather do great violence to the text. And I'd happily defend this critique of what I see as a very flimsy interpretation. So where else could the rapture be better seen to take place in the book of Revelation? Well, the mighty angel in Revelation chapter 10 proclaims, "There will be no more delay, but in the days when the 7th angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets." Now, if we're going to interpret Scripture with Scripture, there is a passage in the letters of Paul which contains a reference to the rapture and indeed to the mystery of God being revealed at the last trumpet. Writing to the believers in Corinth, Paul says, "Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. Of course, the seventh or last trumpet in the book of Revelation sounds immediately after the two witnesses are resurrected and hear the same words John heard in Revelation chapter 4. Come up here. Then we're told they went up to heaven in a cloud. These two witnesses indeed experience resurrection, are clothing with immortality, and are caught up into the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And the seventh trumpet immediately sounds and is followed by an enormous earthquake in Jerusalem and by the beast's awful 3.5-year reign. Perfect. So why do we need to place the rapture in Revelation chapter 4? Some will brand me a mid-tribulationist, but we all know that the beast's awful reign only commences at the beginning of the last 3.5 years, and hence after the rapture, if my interpretation is correct. Some might also argue that only the two witnesses are caught up to heaven in Revelation chapter 11. Well, by the same token, only John is caught up to heaven in Revelation chapter 4. At least we have the last trumpet sounding when the two witnesses are resurrected and caught up to heaven. And I consider this a vital interpretative clue. And it's clearly a future event, unlike John in chapter 4. Assuming the two witnesses are literal witnesses, and that the rapture takes place after their 3.5-year witness in Jerusalem, believers alive at the time will witness these events. Finally, let's look at John's vision in chapter 14. He says, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the white cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple, and cried in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Now, just as the harvest of the grapes of wrath in the following vision look forwards to Armageddon, or the great winepress of God's wrath in chapter 19, so this vision, I believe, looks backwards to the rapture at the seventh or the last trumpet in chapter 11. Now, interestingly, Jesus uses identical language to John's in what's called the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. When speaking of the rapture and the accompanying trumpet call, Jesus says, They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening.